The Force is light and full of shadows.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive Timelines members-only videos you won't find on YouTube. All on our Patreon. The Jedi Temple at dusk. Coruscant's endless traffic bleeds orange light through the council chamber's high windows, streaking the circular floor in bars of dying color that reach toward the center of the room, and find nothing worth illuminating there. Anakin Skywalker sits alone in Mace Windu's chair, a violation he doesn't register, doesn't feel, doesn't care about anymore. The leather is cool beneath his palms. His chest is a clenched fist. His eyes are dry, past the place where tears mean anything, somewhere in the terrain that only opens after a person has already made the hardest decision they know how to make, and is sitting in the silence where consequences live. He told Windu he did the right thing. It has not made anything lighter. Outside, 1,000 speeders cut invisible lines through the smog-orange sky, each one carrying someone toward a life that has no idea what's coming for it. Somewhere across the city, Padme is awake, or asleep, or afraid, and he can feel her the way he always can, a warm point in the Force, steady, unaware of everything pressing down on this night from every direction. He reaches for her without meaning to. He stops himself. The habit of restraint is the only gift he has left himself tonight, and he uses it now the way a drowning man uses the last of his air. The chamber is silent in the particular way that empty rooms are never quite silent. The hum of the building's systems, the distant murmur of the city, 12 kilometers of stacked civilization breathing beneath him, uncountable lives running late for dinner or falling asleep in front of holodramas with no awareness at all that the architecture of their next 1,000 years is being decided by choices made in rooms they will never know existed. He sits in another man's chair, and something is pressing against the moment. A future, dark and specific, leaning its full weight against the present, like a thumb pressed to glass from the other side. He has felt this pressure before, in dreams he couldn't name, in premonitions he didn't trust, in one recurring nightmare about a medical table and a voice telling him she was already gone. He trusts it now. He doesn't know yet that it's about to break through entirely. Then it happens. Not with thunder, not with light. The cosmic force does not knock. It arrives the way sleep arrives, the way death arrives. Total. And already too late to refuse. Anakin gasps. His hands find the chair's armrests and grip until the knuckles go white against the leather. His mind is not his own. Or rather, it is too much his own. 45 years collapse into him like a star folding inward on its own gravity. Not in any order the mind would choose. Not with the decency of narrative sequence. As raw, sensory weight, the accumulated truth of a life already lived inside grief and power and cold, recycled darkness, arriving without warning or permission, or the basic courtesy of transition. The hiss of a respirator he hasn't worn yet and already knows the inside of like a room he slept in too long. The reek of burning flesh on black volcanic sand. The specific, irreducible detail his memory has never once let him abstract into symbol. His own hands, what they became, what they stopped being, what they cost him. The cold, recycled air of a throne room built for one man's isolation at the apex of a battle station the size of a small moon, where he stood for 2 decades, waiting for a thing he had long since stopped being able to name, because the part of him that knew the name had been burned away along with everything else, and what replaced it was patience, and patience was worse. A boy's voice in the dark of a hangar bay inside a battle station, gravity pulling at both of them through a shaft in the floor somewhere below. The galaxy burning at a distance that didn't matter. I won't leave you. I won't. A son who had no rational basis for believing in him, and believed anyway, completely, to the literal end. The voice of that belief is the thing that broke him open, and the thing that reached inside the break and held on, and he has never been able to separate those two facts from each other. The vast, cold bridge of a superstar destroyer, enormous, imperial, indifferent to everything that moved within it, which had included him for years he prefers not to count. A reactor shaft, the weight of a man he once called master, lifted in arms that barely functioned, thrown regardless because function was not the point of it. The sound that weight made on the way down has lived in his body since the moment he heard it. A sound that belongs to the specific and irretrievable category of things that cannot be unknown once they are known, that live not in the mind, but in the muscles, in the marrow, in the space between heartbeats. And last, the thing that undoes him completely, a pale-eyed face turning gentle for the first time in decades, looking up at a son who never stopped believing there was something left to save. No words. There was no time for words. Only the look itself, which said everything that mattered, and arrived exactly when it needed to, which was simultaneously too late and precisely enough. He is Anakin. He is also Vader. He is also something that came after both, a father who died choosing love over an empire of one, and who has apparently impossibly been given the chance to choose it again, earlier, before the fire instead of after it. His 22-year-old body cannot hold the size of it. He folds forward over the armrest, panting, weeping without knowing he has started, the tears arriving before the awareness of them does, the way profound things tend to arrive. His shoulders shake with a grief that has nowhere left to go, and a relief that has nowhere yet to land, and for a long moment the two feelings are indistinguishable from each other. Two hands closing around the same held breath, neither willing to let go first. Luke, Leia. Names he hasn't earned the right to know yet, and knows anyway, down in the marrow, the way you know your own pulse in the dark. He knows their voices. He knows the specific weight of a daughter's silence when she is deciding whether to believe someone, and the particular warmth of a son who has already decided and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. He knows the color of their futures, the ones they built in a different version of this night, a version where he failed everything and everyone and was eventually given one last chance at the very end to do something worth the name of father. He knows what that version of Luke looked like standing in firelight on a moon called Endor, watching something burn on a pyre, and the specific quality of that grief is different from every other grief Anakin Skywalker has ever carried, because that particular grief is the only one in which he himself was the loss. He sits with this. The minutes press. The wake presses back. The chamber is still orange lit, and still and exactly what it was before the cosmic force tore through it. And none of it helps him understand how a person recovers from 45 years of compressed grief in the time it takes to cross a room. He gives it 30 seconds, 40, then he pulls it inward the way the dark side taught him to, without meaning to, not suppression, not denial, but compression. Grief made smaller and more portable, something that fits behind a door he can open later when there is time. The door is load-bearing tonight. It will hold. Something else is pressing at the edges of his awareness now, not from outside. From along the bond, he has spent 3 years trying not to acknowledge the full depth of a signature in the Force as familiar to him as his own name, and suddenly vast, ancient, vast. A particular quality of presence that has not been in his range in a very long time, and which is now arriving from 12,000 light-years away with the force of something that has been waiting for exactly this moment. Ahsoka. 12,000 light-years away, hyperspace streams white and endless past a viewport on the tribunal, and Ahsoka Tano is standing at the observation rail when the dark current she can't yet name presses in at the edges of her awareness. It arrives first as pressure behind her montrals, a weight without a source, the kind of sensation she has learned over years of combat to treat as more reliable than almost any conscious thought. Then, before she has done anything at all with that awareness, before she has managed to tighten her grip on the rail, the same collapse, her knees fold. The cold deck comes up to meet her. 38 years land across her 17-year-old shoulders all at once. Not as vision, not as memory arranged in any order a trained mind could organize. As weight, the full, undifferentiated weight of a life already spent and paid for. Arriving in a single compressed instant, the way only the most important things ever arrive. Without announcement, without preparation, already happened by the time awareness catches up to it. Malakor's white fire and the sound of a lightsaber cutting through everything she thought she understood about loyalty and what it means to follow someone into a darkness you can feel, but not yet name. The particular silence of standing on a broken world, above the ruins of something ancient and terrible, and finally, at devastating cost, finished. The strange gray nowhere of the world between worlds, where time bent sideways and she stood outside of it entirely, and understood briefly and completely, and in a way that has never once left her, that the Force was older and stranger and more patient than any story she had ever been given for it. That the Force grieved too, in its own way. That the Force was not indifferent. It was just very, very slow. The long, unhurried loneliness of years spent in the margins of a recovering galaxy, moving through missions that mattered and were never commemorated, watching systems rebuild from a careful distance because the center of things had stopped being available to her, and she had learned, eventually, to stop standing at the edge of it and waiting to be welcomed back in. The specific texture of voluntary exile, which is not the absence of belonging, but the persistent presence of it somewhere unreachable. And the graves. She carries graves now the way she used to carry a second lightsaber. Constantly, their weight integrated into everything until she stops noticing, and then something forces her to notice, and the weight is everything at once. She has learned to carry them without letting them bury her. She learns it again now, in a single unbearable instant, kneeling on the floor of an observation deck 12,000 light-years from anyone who knows her full name. She presses both palms flat against the cold durasteel and breathes. 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 She is 17. She is ancient. She is impossibly back, standing at the very edge of the worst night the galaxy will ever survive, with every year she spent surviving it already spent, already hers, already paid for in the only currency grief accepts. The physical reality of the ship reasserts itself slowly, piece by piece, the way awareness always reassembles after something enormous has moved through it. The vibration of the hyperdrive through the deck plating, the faint antiseptic smell of the climate system, the pull of a draft from the ventilation housing above her head. She is here. She is real. These memories are real, and the 50-something minutes between this moment and the end of one version of the future are precious and closing at a rate she can feel in the space between her ribs. The bond between them ignites, not a flame, a blast wave. In the council chamber, Anakin's head snaps up. Across the stars, Ahsoka feels him. An inrushing warmth, unmistakably his, older now and healed now and here in the way that a fire is here, completely making the dark around it visible by contrast. The exchange isn't words at first. It is pure information, faster than language, faster than breath. Alive. Here, I know. How long? 55 minutes, maybe less. Enough. Has to be enough. Two minds that spent a war learning to finish each other's thoughts, finish this one before either of them has fully stood up. Then words, barely a whisper across the bond worn thin by distance and urgency alike, and heavier for both. Snips, are you there? Her reply comes with tears already behind it, held in place by iron will and the full weight of everything she needs to do in the next hour. Tears that will have to wait until there is time for them, which means they will wait, because she has decided this. I'm here, Master. We don't have much time. Anakin stands. His knees don't ache. His right arm is flesh and blood, warm and whole, closing and opening around nothing in particular, just to feel it work, to confirm that it is real and not another cruelty dressed as mercy. He draws one slow breath through a chest that hasn't needed a machine to fill it in. 23 years, and something in him, something hollow. Something shaped exactly like the grief he has been carrying since a Tatooine dusk older than this one. Contracts and releases, and contracts again, a wound remembering how to close. There is no time to feel it all the way through. He will feel it later. He has promised himself that much. Later. The word is load-bearing tonight, and he intends to honor it. Right now, the bond hums taut between him and his Padawan, a wire strung across the galaxy, and they are vibrating at the same frequency for the first time in either of their lives. He understands, without her having to explain it, what she is doing on that ship. He understands what he needs to do on this end. The two halves of a single plan arrive already joined. The way a sentence arrives complete even as it begins, the end present in the first word, just not yet spoken. He turns from Mace Windu's chair. He crosses the chamber floor, the orange light sliding off his shoulders as he moves, and for the first time in either of his lives, he does not feel the need to look back at what he is leaving behind. He reaches the door. His stride, on the other side of it, is the stride of a man who has already watched this story end in fire, once, in another life, and has decided with every atom of a body he was never supposed to get back, that tonight it ends in something else entirely. Ahsoka does not wait. She is on her feet before her heart rate has settled, moving through the corridor with the hyperdrive's low thrum vibrating up through the deck plating and into the soles of her boots. Every porthole frames the same cold, antiseptic blue-white glow. Hyperspace, indifferent and endless, streaming past like something that doesn't know a war is about to not begin the way it was supposed to. She passes, two clones coming the other way. They salute. She returns it without breaking stride, filing their faces the way she has always filed faces in the last breath before a battle. Biv, on her left, the careful, methodical one who always double-checks his loadout before anyone else has thought to. Ketch, on her right, the one who sings under his breath on long marches and pretends he doesn't. Two of the good ones. She will get to them. She will get to everyone. Everyone gets to live tonight, if she can be fast enough, precise enough, merciless enough with her own hesitation. But Rex first. Rex is always first. He's on the bridge, leaning over the navigation console with the particular stillness of a man running routine diagnostic checks, the kind a soldier runs when there is nothing specific to worry about, and the deep habit of vigilance requires something to do with itself. He looks up when she enters. The ease of his posture is the ease of two people who have long since stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. An ease built over a war's worth of shared close calls and long silences, and the specific mutual trust that only forms between people who have saved each other's lives enough times that it stops being remarkable. His voice comes out warm and unguarded, the way he only allows himself to be unguarded around her. "Commander, you're up early. ETA to Coruscant still." She crosses the distance in 4 steps. She does not have a sentence for this moment. She rehearsed several in the 40 seconds of corridor between the observation rail and this room, and none of them were short enough, or kind enough, or honest enough to be the right thing to say to a man who is about to discover that his own mind is a weapon aimed at everyone he loves. There are no right words for this. There are only 3 words that are less wrong than the alternatives. "I'm sorry, Rex." Then the force closes around his motor cortex, gentle and absolute, a hand closing around a candle flame without letting the wax burn the fingers that hold it. He drops mid-word, mid-breath, mid-whatever thought was still forming behind his eyes. She catches him before his skull finds the console edge, both arms coming around him, and for 2 full seconds, longer than she can spare, not as long as she needs, she simply holds him. The weight of him in her arms is the full, undeniable weight of everything she is about to do in his name without his permission, and she lets herself feel the mass of that theft before she moves again. She owes him that much. She takes it on deliberately, consciously, as debt rather than necessity. She is choosing this, she is the one who gets to choose it, and she will not dress that fact up as anything else. Then she shoulders him and moves. The medical bay comes to life at her arrival the way a held breath releases. The GH-7 surgical droid extends its diagnostic arm within 30 seconds, servos cycling through startup in a mechanical sequence that feels, to Ahsoka, simultaneously glacial and barely fast enough. She lays Rex across the table. She runs the scanner herself, because trusting the droid's standard search parameters would take 3 times as long as knowing exactly what she is looking for and where to look for it. The chip materializes on the display, a small gray intrusion nestled against his brainstem, sitting exactly where years of research told her it would be. Small, precise, a thing designed to hide inside the body the way a lie hides inside a true sentence. Nearly impossible to find if you don't already know it's there, and devastatingly effective precisely because of that invisibility. She issues instructions to the droid in a low, unbroken stream of medical terminology that a 17-year-old field commander has no business possessing. The Ahsoka who spent the long years after a war that almost ended everything learning the full anatomy of that almost, she spent a considerable portion of those years on exactly this. 22-year-old Ahsoka Tano, according to the Jedi Order's medical records, has a field medic's competent working knowledge of clone neurology. The Ahsoka, now standing at this table, has a grandmaster's. She borrows that fluency without apology, because the time for apology is not now, and the chips are not going to remove themselves. The droid begins its incision. She does not watch. She cannot afford to. She moves back through the corridor at a controlled run, toward the bridge and the communication suite bolted into the starboard wall. The holonet transceiver relay sits behind its panel housing, a module the size of a field kit, humming with the low-frequency pulse of a live connection to a republic that does not know it is about to break. She does not slice it. Slicing takes time she has measured out to the second, and does not have. She places her palm flat against the housing instead, feels the electronics humming underneath her fingers like something with a pulse of its own, and squeezes the force around it the way a hand closes around something it intends to destroy. The panel buckles inward. The relay implodes with a sound like a bone breaking under a blanket. Muffled, final, wrong in the specific way that irreversible things are always wrong even when they are necessary. Every screen on the bridge flickers once and dies. The tribunal goes blind and silent simultaneously, cut loose from every signal that might have found it. Whatever Palpatine broadcasts across the Republic in the next hour, this ship will never hear it. She allows herself one breath, then she is moving again. The environmental manifold sits behind a maintenance hatch on Deck 3 that wants an officer's clearance code she does not have time to fake. She does not fake it. She lays 2 fingers against the lock mechanism and unravels it through the Force, feeling it give the way old trust gives, reluctantly and then all at once. Inside, the atmospheric delivery system waits in rows of clean, anonymous piping. She finds the Tabana variant stun compound in the emergency supply cache, sealed for hull breach anesthesia, and never once intended for what she is about to do with it. She reroutes a controlled bleed into the circulation loop, feeding decks 4 through 6, watches the flow gauge climb in small, careful increments. 40 clones are sleeping in their bunks right now, dreaming whatever a soldier with a chip in his skull dreams the night before he is asked to fire on people he loves. She is buying them a different dream, a cleaner one. She runs for the medical bay without waiting to see the gauge settle. 4 minutes later, her comms unit registers the biometric dip she has been listening for. 40 men sliding from ordinary sleep into something deeper, something that will let them wake up on the other side of tonight with their hands clean. The hangar is the hard problem. It was always going to be the hard problem. There is no dispersal system that covers a room that size, and no approach angle that gets her past the entrance without accounting for whoever is already inside it. She drops through the maintenance ladder and lands on the hangar deck in a controlled crouch, coming up into a room that is fully, inconveniently awake. 2 ATTs sit in maintenance position at the far wall, access panels open, crew working methodically around them. A trio of L8 gunships occupies the center of the floor, being prepped with the unhurried professionalism of soldiers who have no reason to rush. 30 clones in total. Heads turn the moment she appears through the maintenance hatch rather than the main door. Hands move toward holsters, not yet committed, still in the processing stage. Confusion buying her the only currency this plan has left to spend. Commander Tano? Something wrong? She does not explain. There is not a sentence efficient enough to carry the truth, and every second spent constructing one costs her the element she has built this entire plan around. The moment before they understand what she is doing, which is the only moment she gets, she reaches out instead. The Force repulse tears through the room in a single convulsive pulse, not precise the way her saber work is precise, not targeted or selective, but overwhelming and total. Every blaster and every hand in the room wrenched free simultaneously. 30 weapons ripped clean in the same breath, a synchronized cascade of metal clattering and skidding across the deck in every direction at once. The sound ringing off the hangar walls before dying into absolute stunned silence. The silence holds for 2 full heartbeats. In those 2 heartbeats, 30 clones stand empty-handed and staring, 30 sets of eyes performing the same calculation. What just happened? What does it mean? What do I do about it? She hits the emergency suppression trigger on the overhead fire system before any of those calculations reach a conclusion. The nozzles open with a hiss that seems too small for what it is. A fine chemical mist descends from the ceiling in a slow, almost gentle curtain, catching the hangar lights and fragmenting them into something that might, in any other context, be described as beautiful. 30 soldiers sit down, one after another in a long, unhurried row, as if the idea of standing has simply lost its authority over them. She catches 2 who are tipping toward hard equipment edges, extending the Force across the distance with both arms at once, the effort burning through her shoulders and down her sides, her legs threatening to give under a fatigue that has nothing to do with muscle, and everything to do with the sustained cost of working at this scale for this long, without rest. She stands alone in a hangar full of sleeping soldiers. Her chest heaves. The lights tick quietly. The silence is enormous, and she is, for 3 full seconds, allowed to exist inside it. 3 seconds. Then she starts counting again. Rex is already awake when she returns to the medical bay at a dead run. His eyes are open, fixed on the ceiling, blinking against the surgical lights, with the dazed stillness of a man surfacing from something he cannot yet name. The scar tissue above his temple is still an angry, unfinished pink, the skin pulled tight around a new absence, a small gray thing that used to sit there and no longer does. He turns his head when she enters, finds her face, and his voice, when it comes, is a broken kind of quiet she has never once heard from him before. Not on Umbara, not anywhere. Ahsoka, a pause that costs him something visible, something moving through the set of his jaw and the line of his shoulders in the specific way that difficult realizations move through people who have been trained not to display them. What did you just do? She pulls a chair to his bedside and sits, because her legs have earned the right to stop holding her up for a moment, and because he deserves to be looked at eye level for this, not from the altitude of authority, not from the distance of command, but as one person to another, on the same level, with no rank between them and the truth. The assembly line will not begin in earnest for a few more minutes. She gives him the only currency she has left tonight. 60 seconds, uninterrupted, belonging entirely to him. There is a chip in every clone's skull, she says. Her voice is steady. She has decided this, and so it is. Buried against the brainstem. When a specific command signal fires, it overrides voluntary motor function and replaces it with a single directive. It was designed to be indetectable and unrefusable. She holds his eyes. She does not soften it, because he is Rex and softening it would be its own form of disrespect. Within the hour, that signal was going to fire. It would have turned all of you, against every Jedi you have ever fought beside, without hesitation, without being able to choose otherwise. Rex stares at her for a long moment. His face does the thing soldiers' faces do when they are asked to accept something that cannot fit inside the world they thought they understood. A controlled structural collapse. The look of a man rebuilding his own foundations in real time, because the old ones just gave way beneath him. He processes it the way Rex has always processed the impossible, methodically, in silence, without letting the impossibility become an argument against accepting it. Then he nods. Once. I saved your life, she says. Now I need you to help me save everyone else's. He holds her eyes for one more moment. She watches him measure the distance between the soldier he has always understood himself to be and the thing he was apparently built to become, without ever knowing it. She watches him find the edges of that gap, and then watches him decide, without ceremony, without self-pity, with the plain, unfussy competence that has always been his most distinctive quality, not to stand at those edges and grieve, but to step back from them and work. Tell me what you need. They established the assembly line with both GH-7 droids running in parallel, one surgical bed each, the two units humming their identical low mechanical hymn into antiseptic air. Ahsoka's exact knowledge of the chip's placement, drawn from years of research and a life not yet lived. Rex's authority over the men, absolute and unquestioned. A captain's voice is a different instrument than a commander's. And what it plays in a man who has just woken up to the truth of what was sitting inside his own skull is something no chain of command ever trained for, something Rex invents in real time out of steadiness and plain speech, and the specific kind of love that never bothers to announce itself. They establish a priority order by threat profile. Jesse first, the ARC trooper whose instincts would give him the best chance of breaking free from any isolation attempt. Then the remaining ARs, by lethality, then line infantry descending. Ahsoka moves between the two tables, like a conductor working two orchestras simultaneously, one hand guiding each incision through the Force while her voice stays low and even. Rex manages the queue, carrying unconscious brothers in from the corridor one at a time, checking pulse and breath and pupil response with the same steady hands that have checked for shrapnel wounds 100 times over. It is grueling. It is mechanical. It is repetitive in the way that only truly sacred work ever manages to be. Jesse is the third man through the line. He surfaces slowly, blinking against the surgical lights, and his first instinct, the chip's ghost still warm and twitching in the pathways it used to own, is a flinch away from the shape standing over him. Then it clears, the way morning fog burns off a viewport, and underneath it is years of a loyalty that was always real, always his, a devotion the chip only ever sat alongside and never actually replaced. His hand finds the fresh incision above his temple, fingers pressing gently against the pulling skin. Commander. His voice does not work quite right the first time. What was that? What did I? You were never going to be able to choose. Ahsoka's voice is very gentle, pitched low enough to belong only to the two of them. That's the whole point of it, Jesse. You never had a choice. Not once. Not ever. He closes his eyes. Something crosses his face in that closed second. Something that was, for one unguarded breath, less soldier and more simply a young man who almost did something that would have unmade him. Then his eyes open, and he asks the only question he has room left for. What do you need me to do? He is on his feet within the minute, working the cue beside Rex before the anesthetic has fully cleared his system. Because standing still tonight is somehow worse than working through the shaking in his hands. Deep in the brig, the containment cell holds. Maul's presence in the Force is a cold ember pulsing behind magnetic shielding, and he has felt it. The enormous, sudden signature blazing through the ship like a second sun, rising somewhere he cannot see. He presses both palms flat against the containment field and waits, patient in the particular way only a creature raised entirely on patience can be. The ship does not come to him tonight. He remains where he is, a held breath at the bottom of the vessel, unresolved, uncounted for, a problem left open because every other problem was more urgent, and because this ship is moving toward Coruscant regardless. And that is enough for now. The hours grind forward. He runs. Not the frantic sprint of a young man in panic, the controlled, ground-eating stride of a veteran who has covered this distance before, in a body that no longer aches the way his old one did. The temple corridors blur past in streaks of stone and lamplight, familiar in the way that places are familiar when you have walked them in nightmares and in memory both, for years, in a form that no longer looked anything like yourself. He knows every turn. He knows the distance between the arched doorways and the placement of the floor-mounted lamp housings, and the particular quality of the echo the hallway throws back at a man moving at speed. He has run this route in a different life enough times to have worn a groove in whatever part of him holds such things. He runs it now with his eyes fully open for the first time. He reaches the hangar-adjacent hallway and finds Mace Windu already there, already flanked by Kit Fisto, Saesee Tiin, and Ajen Kolar, the four of them moving toward the waiting speeder, with the grim economical purpose of soldiers walking into what they believe is a confrontation with a desperate cornered old man in an isolated office. They believe it is going to be complicated, but survivable. They believe that difficulty will be political rather than martial. Anakin can read all of this in the set of their shoulders, and the quality of their silence, and the gap between what they expect and what they are walking toward is wide enough to swallow all of them. He steps directly into their path. Mace Windu stops. His eyes run over Anakin with the particular careful read of a Jedi Master who has spent decades learning to see past a face into whatever sits beneath it, and what he finds there stops him cold. This is not the volatile young knight who walked out of his office 20 minutes ago, carrying an accusation like a wound he couldn't stop touching. The eyes are wrong. Too still. Too old. Mace has spent enough of his life in the company of warriors who survived long enough to arrive somewhere past bravery. A place where fear simply stops metabolizing, burns clean out of the system, leaving behind something quieter and considerably more dangerous. To recognize that quality when it looks back at him. He is looking at it now, through Anakin Skywalker's young, unlined face. Skywalker. Mace's voice carries a caution he extends to very few people and only ever earns by encountering something that demands it. I'm coming with you. Anakin does not move out of the doorway. His hands hang loose at his sides, neither reaching for his saber nor drawing away from it, simply present. A man who has already made all the decisions he intends to make tonight and is now simply executing them. And you need to hear me before we walk through that door, a beat, weighted, and deliberate. The Chancellor is Darth Sidious. I told you that already. What I didn't tell you is that I have faced him before. Nobody moves. Somewhere behind Mace, Kit Fisto's head tilts a fraction of a degree, the small, alert stillness of a predator recalibrating. Explain, Mace says. One word. It is not a question and it is not an invitation. It is a command issued by a man who has exactly the time he has and intends to use every second of it correctly. So Anakin does. The information comes out of him in a shape Mace has never once heard from a student, and rarely from a fellow master. Clean, sequenced, stripped of hedging, each piece of intelligence laid down like a stone in a wall being built in real time. Not performance, not argument. Pure operational briefing, delivered by someone who has given exactly this kind of briefing before, in a war that no one else in this corridor has fought. He will produce a lightsaber from his sleeve the moment he thinks he's cornered. A single blade. The first move is a horizontal spinning attack at chest height, full rotation, faster than anything you will expect from a man his age. Don't attempt to parry it. There isn't enough angle or time. Drop into a crouch and let it pass over your heads. He looks at Ajen Kolar directly, holds the eye contact for one deliberate second. That is the move that kills you if you are standing where you would normally stand. Don't stand there. Kolar's jaw works once. He says nothing. Something moves behind his eyes that is not quite fear, and not quite the absence of it. The careful recalibration of a fighter who has just been told with enough specificity to be credible that his default position is a death sentence. After the opening sequence, he shifts to Force Lightning. He uses it to isolate. He cannot win a sustained engagement against 4 Jedi who maintain formation. Don't let him separate anyone. Triangulate. Hold the triangle regardless of what he throws at the formation. Cover each other's flanks as a reflex, not a decision. Anakin's hands move as he speaks, tracing geometry in the air, the way he traced it for cadets in a life that hasn't happened yet. There is a hidden console behind the wood paneling on the left wall of his office, approximately a meter off the floor. Holonet relay. If he reaches that console and gets a signal out, it does not matter what happens to the 5 of us in that room. The war is already lost. A pause, brief and absolute. If it comes to it, I will put a lightsaber through that wall myself. Kit Fisto studies him for a long moment, dark eyes unreadable in the lamplight, and asks the question with the quiet, precise economy he brings to everything. How are you certain of this, General Skywalker? The silence that opens after the question has a texture to it, something the 4 masters can almost feel against their skin. Not menace, not deception. Something far stranger than either of those. The specific weight of a truth that shouldn't be structurally possible and is anyway. Anakin meets his eyes. He allows the silence one full breath before he answers. Because I helped build this trap. Nobody asks him to clarify. Nobody in this moment wants to. The words sit in the air between them like a load-bearing wall that everyone in the room has just silently agreed not to touch until they are on the other side of tonight. Mace Windu is not a man who yields easily. He has built a career, a council seat, a reputation on the specific discipline of not yielding. To fear, to doubt, to the seductive comfort of an easy explanation, the weight of the doctrine he has spent a lifetime defending presses against this moment from every direction. And Vapad is a blade that cuts both directions. It opens him to the deep current of emotional truth, the way it opens him to the dark side's gravity, and what radiates off Anakin Skywalker right now is neither dark nor gray nor anything Mace has a category for. It is something so clean, so absolutely certain, that standing close to it is almost physically uncomfortable, the way standing in direct sunlight is uncomfortable, not because the sun means you harm, but because it was never built to be experienced at this proximity by anything as small as a human eye. Mace yields, not in words, in a half step back, and the smallest tilt of his head, and the sound of a decision being made somewhere behind his eyes that costs him more than he will ever say aloud. He does not announce it. He does not frame it. He simply makes it, which is the version of the thing that costs the most and means the most. The formation reshapes around that half step. Anakin at the point, Mace directly behind him, Kit Fisto and Saesee Tiin fanning to the flanks, Ajan Kolar dropping to the rear, already reassessing the corridor ahead and every entry point beyond it, already standing somewhere other than where he would normally stand. You lead, Mace says. 2 words. They cost him something visible, something Anakin recognizes because he spent 20 years learning to read the precise weight of everything Mace Windu did not say. If we survive this, Skywalker, you will explain to me exactly how you know what you know. Anakin turns toward the speeder, already moving, already calculating the next 30 seconds in his head, the way he has spent the last 45 years calculating the next 30 seconds in one form or another, in one body or another always. If we survive this, Master Windu, he says, I will tell you everything. The speeder lifts off the platform, and Coruscant opens beneath and around them in every direction. 1,000,000 lights stacked 12 kilometers deep, 1,000,000,000 lives running late or arguing with a spouse, or sitting awake in the particular sleeplessness of minor worries. None of them aware that the entire architecture of the galaxy's next 1,000 years is currently being decided by 5 people in an open-topped vehicle cutting through the smog-orange dusk at 200 kilometers an hour. The city at this height is something specific. It is not beautiful the way open spaces are beautiful, or the way natural things are beautiful. It is beautiful the way density is beautiful when you have spent enough time away from it to notice. All of it stacked and humming and interdependent, the way a living thing is interdependent, every system running off every other system in a network too vast to fully conceptualize, and therefore accepted as simply the shape of things, the background condition of existence that stops being visible until something threatens to end it. He spent 23 years in the shadow of a version of this city that killed everything it couldn't use. He spent 23 years enforcing the silence of those million lights by threat of force. The city never knew. The city kept running. The city kept stacking its 12 kilometers of lives on top of each other and calling it civilization. And what he carried in the chest of that black suit was, among other things, the knowledge that the civilization didn't know what it was living inside of, and that he was part of the reason it didn't know, and that there was nothing he could do about any of it from where he stood. He tips his face into the wind. It is cold and real, and his heart is not calm. It has not been calm in 23 years, in one form or another, and it is not calm now. There is too much riding on the next few minutes, too many threads that have to hold at the same time on both sides of a 12,000 light-year gap. Too many ways this still ends in fire. But his hands gripping the speeder's rail are steady. His hands have been steady since he left the council chamber. He has decided they are going to stay that way. Across the distance, the bond hums with something that isn't words. A pulse from Ahsoka's direction, rhythmic and controlled, the signal of someone working steadily through a list she cannot afford to rush and cannot afford to slow down on. He does not reach for her. He trusts her the way he should have trusted her from the beginning of the original version of all this, which is to say, without qualification, without reserve, completely. He trusts her the way he has spent 2 lifetimes learning to trust her, first reluctantly and then fully, and then across a silence so long it nearly broke both of them. He trusts her, and he holds the rail, and the speeder cuts across the orange dusk toward a lit corridor in a Senate building that has no idea what is waiting inside it. Beside him, Mace Windu says nothing. The set of his jaw says enough. This is a man running the numbers continuously, processing what he heard in that hallway against everything he knows about Palpatine and everything he thought he knew about Anakin Skywalker, finding places where the 2 pictures don't match and holding them in suspension because now is not the time to resolve them. Kit Fisto stands in the rear of the speeder, with his eyes half closed, the Force moving through him in the particular way it moves through a Nautolan who is actively preparing, not agitated, not excited, simply gathering himself the way water gathers before it moves. Saci Tin is a statue. Ajin Kolar has quietly repositioned his weight 3 times since they lifted off, working out the muscle memory of a new default stance. They are not, Anakin thinks, going to need all of it. Some of it, certainly. But not all of it, because he is not who he was the first time this happened. And they are not 4 masters walking toward a political detention without full intelligence on what they are walking into. They are 5. The speeder descends. The Senate building resolves below them, most of its windows dark at this hour, its power concentrated into one lit corridor that leads toward the Chancellor's private suite. From above, the building looks exactly like what it is. The center of a republic that has been slowly hollowed out over decades, its forms and institutions maintained in perfect working order, while everything that gave those forms meaning was quietly extracted and replaced with the architecture of one man's patience. Anakin knows the inside of that patience the way he knows the inside of his own nightmares. He helped furnish it, in another version of this night, with his own choices. He is not going to help furnish it again. The platform comes up to meet them. 5 Jedi step off the speeder into the cold, stale air of a building that was cleared of witnesses hours ago by a man who knew exactly what was coming and arranged the board accordingly. Anakin registers the empty guard posts, the unlit checkpoints, the particular, deliberate quality of a perimeter that has been cleared rather than simply unoccupied. The confirmation settles into his chest like a stone into still water. He draws one breath. He does not draw his saber. The Force tells him, "Not yet. Not yet." "Stay on the triangle," he says quietly, without turning around. "Whatever he shows you first, it isn't the real opening." Then he walks through the door. The Senate building at this hour is a hollowed thing. Most of its offices dark, its power drawn inward and concentrated into one lit corridor, leading toward the Chancellor's private suite, like a single vein still carrying blood through a body that has otherwise gone cold. The corridor is empty. No guards flank the inner door. No aides wait in the anteroom with datapads and scheduling concerns. In the careful bubble of Palpatine's manufactured isolation, this absence is by design, has been by design, Anakin knows. For weeks, the perimeter cleared in stages so gradual that no single removal registered as unusual to anyone watching. The Sith Lord has been preparing this stage for a long time. He cleared his own audience before the performance began. The 5 Jedi move through the corridor without sound. Anakin's hand rests near his hilt, but does not close around it. The Force tells him, "Not yet, not yet. The moment will announce itself." He has felt this specific moment in memory, lived through a version of it in another body, and the shape of it is so known to him now that he does not need the Force to tell him when it arrives. He can feel it the way you feel the pressure change before weather. Palpatine looks up from his desk as they enter. His face does its work beautifully. Shock first, the wide-eyed flinch of a man interrupted mid-thought, a man whose inner life is apparently so absorbed in the mundane work of governance that the arrival of 5 armed Jedi in his private office requires a full second to process. Then confusion, layered over it with the care of someone who has been laying confusion over things for so long that the motion is entirely automatic. The bewilderment of a leader who has never once in his political life expected to be disbelieved because he has never given anyone sufficient cause. His hand moves toward the comm on his desk, calling for guards who have been quietly redirected and will never come, playing out a script that has worked flawlessly for 33 years. His voice carries just enough wounded dignity to make a stranger flinch on his behalf. What is the meaning of this? Anakin watches from 3 meters behind Mace Windu, and the horror of it is not that he is watching a monster. He has always known he was watching a monster. The horror is that the monster is this good, that the performance that once fooled a 9-year-old boy in the Senate halls on Coruscant, and then fooled a 22-year-old knight in this very room over 13 careful years of patient cultivation, now looks to him like nothing at all. Cardboard, the visible seams of a mask, worn one too many times by a man who has been so successful for so long that he has forgotten anyone was ever capable of seeing underneath it. Then Palpatine's hand moves toward his sleeve. Down. Anakin's voice cracks across the room with the flat, absolute authority of a man who has given that exact command in live combat more times than he can count, and all 4 masters drop without a heartbeat of hesitation. Not because of rank, not out of trained reflex, but because something in the register of that word bypasses argument entirely, goes straight to the body, and the body obeys before the mind catches up. The spinning attack ignites and tears through the exact space where 4 Jedi chests were standing, 1 second earlier, a single crimson blade scything through empty air in a blurring horizontal arc. A technique of terrifying speed and economy that requires less time to execute than it takes to identify it coming. Palpatine comes out of the spin and finds all 5 of them still alive. In Anakin's memory, across every version of this night he has ever lived through, in every shape his living has ever taken, this is the single most beautiful thing he has ever watched move across that face. The formation reshapes instantly. Kit Fisto peels left. Fluid Ataru footwork carrying him through the room's geometry without attacking it. Not advancing, not retreating, simply denying Palpatine the space he needs. Saesee Tiin locks down the rear of the room, blade raised in containment posture, cutting off retreat. Ajin Kolar takes the door, feet precisely where Anakin told him to stand. A new default position built in the last 10 minutes in a hallway back at the temple. Already second nature now because Kolar is exactly the kind of fighter who can absorb instruction and make it reflex in the time it takes to cross a city. Mace Windu steps forward alone into the center of the room, and his blade ignites violet, and Vapad wakes in him fully, not as technique but as condition, as something Mace does not so much choose as allow. The dark current in the room bending toward him and being redirected the way a river bends at a stone that has spent long enough in its path. Palpatine can feel it. Anakin can see him feel it. Watches the calculation move behind those yellow eyes. The rapid assessment of a tactician who has just discovered that the ground he expected to be fighting on has been replaced by something entirely different. Recalculation, the first sign that he is not, tonight, in control. He tries the lightning next, a scattering arc aimed at Kit Fisto, meant to break the formation apart before it can fully close around him, to create an opening wide enough to slip through. It glances off Kit's angled blade in a cascade of dissipating sparks and goes harmlessly into the wall, and Anakin is already moving, closing the gap before Palpatine can use the half-second he bought with the attempt, driving forward into the space the Sith needs empty. Their eyes meet across 3 meters of wrecked carpet and charged air. Palpatine looks at Anakin Skywalker and finds nothing. No conflict, no anguish, waiting at the surface, trembling and exploitable. No thread of fear for a wife hidden somewhere in the dark that a practiced hand could pull on and unravel everything. No half-formed darkness coiled just beneath the surface, ready to be invited to complete itself. The man in front of him is not the boy he spent 13 careful years sculpting into a weapon. Not the volatile, brilliant, desperately loving young knight who could be moved by the right words and the right voice at the right moment, who wanted so badly to save the people he loved that the wanting itself was a door anyone patient enough to find a handle could walk through. He is something the Sith Lord has never once encountered in 1,000 years of patient Sith doctrine, a weapon that was turned against its own maker, survived the turning, and came back. The fear that crosses Palpatine's face is small, controlled, very nearly invisible, the product of a discipline so long practiced that even in the moment of breaking it still holds shape at the edges. Anakin sees it anyway. He has spent 23 years learning to see exactly that. Palpatine falls back a step. His eyes move, not to Anakin, not to Mace, not to the 4 blades now angled toward him from different points of a closing geometry, but to the wood-paneled wall at his left, to a seam in the grain that no untrained eye would register as a door. A seam that sits approximately 1 meter off the floor, behind the second panel from the left, in a wall that was custom-built to specifications the architect was never told the full purpose of. Anakin has been waiting across 2 lifetimes for that look. "Don't," he says. Quietly, the single word carries the full weight of everything he knows, everything he has seen this moment become in a different version of itself. Everything the console behind that panel represents to a galaxy that does not yet know how close it is to losing the next 1,000 years of its own future. Palpatine freezes for exactly 1 second. The second passes. Whatever desperation has lived coiled beneath that performance for 70 years, finally, catastrophically, breaks the surface. He abandons every scrap of tactical positioning he has held for the last 4 minutes, a lapse he would never permit himself at full confidence. A crack in a discipline that is held without showing daylight since before the Clone War was a concept. He is desperate enough now to show the crack, which means he is more desperate than Anakin has ever seen him, which means the plan is working, which means it has to keep working for approximately 3 more seconds. Palpatine moves for the console. Anakin does not follow him across the room. He goes through the wall instead. He extends his right hand, flesh and blood, alive and warm, a hand he spent 23 years without and will never again take for granted, and drives the Force into the left wall of the Chancellor's office like a battering ram swung by something far larger than one man's arm. The wood paneling doesn't crack so much as disintegrate, splinters spraying inward in a widening cone. The plaster beneath it cradles apart in dry, silent sheets. And there, exposed in the wreckage like a secret that has been waiting its entire life to be found, sits the holonet relay housing. A gray module the size of a supply crate, webbed with 100 black cables running into the building's spine like roots pressed deep into soil. It tears free of its mounting and crumples in midair, folding inward the way a paper box folds under a closing fist, not crushed so much as collapsed, all the structural integrity leaving it at once, the casing compressing in on itself in a long, deliberate contraction, the cables spark and spit. Small, bright deaths in dust-choked air. The module keeps shrinking, keeps folding, until what was once the last unbroken link between Palpatine and every inhibitor chip in the Grand Army of the Republic is the size of a clenched fist. Anakin lets it drop. It hits the floor with a sound smaller than the moment deserves. The Force in him right now is not angry. It is precise. It is purposeful the way a surgeon's hand is purposeful, correcting a 23-year-old error with the full patient weight of the cosmic force gathered behind one outstretched palm. The way you correct something important, without drama, without announcement, simply and completely. The console does not transmit. Order 66 dies in the wall, silent, unheard, unfired. A signal that will never reach the stars it was built to reach, a command that will never find the receivers it was built to activate, a plan that took 1,000 years to construct and ends now in a room full of dust and sparking cable and the sound of Darth Sidious making a noise. Anakin has never once heard from him in 2 lifetimes. It is not a scream, it is not a laugh, it is something that has characteristics of both and is neither. A sound that belongs to a man whose entire architecture of patient contingency has just collapsed in a single moment. Raw, unfiltered, stripped of every layer of performance that has kept it contained for 70 years. Palpatine turns on Anakin, and what comes out of him now is not calculation, not the refined strategic instinct of a Sith who has survived 2,000 years. 1,000 years of patient doctrine. It is 60 years of certainty dissolving in a single failed instant. He attacks without a plan. And an unplanned Palpatine, Anakin discovers in real time, is simply a very powerful Sith Lord who has started, for the first time in the presence of anyone now standing in this room, to panic. The Force lightning that pours out of him now is not a weapon deployed with surgical purpose. It is a tantrum given the shape of cosmological power, white-blue fire coming off him in a continuous roaring sheet, the kind of sustained output that in another life melted through Mace Windu's guard in under a minute and left him a ruin on his own office floor. The formation absorbs it differently this time. Saci Tin catches the initial burst full across his raised blade and is thrown back into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster, but he hits the wall whole, not incinerated, and the hand that finds the wall on the way down finds it as a surface to push off of, rather than a place to collapse against. Kit Fisto rolls clear in one fluid motion, untouched. Ajin Kolar's counter catches a secondary bolt and pushes back against it, boots skidding across the floor under the sustained pressure, jaw set, every muscle in his body dedicated to not giving an inch. But Mace holds the center. Mace has always held the center. His blade is a violet blur, Vapod at its deepest expression, drinking in the dark current of Palpatine's own power and turning it back toward its source. But this is the edge of what Vapod can absorb, the outermost limit of the technique's tolerance, and Anakin can see the cost of it in Mace's knees beginning, almost imperceptibly, to bend. Can feel the weight of it in the Force. The blade is shaking. The sweat-cutting lines through the dust on Mace's face is not from exertion alone. He is going to go down. Anakin steps past him. He does not ignite his blade in anger. He ignites it the way you'd light a lamp in a dark room, without ceremony, without announcement, a small mechanical click, and then a hum that means nothing except that light now exists, where a moment ago there was none. The blue blade rises between him and Palpatine, the same blue it has always been, the color of sky, the color of water, the color of something that has never once stopped believing in the possibility of living regardless of what has tried to convince it otherwise. He catches the full output of Palpatine's Force lightning on the flat of the blade. He does not stop moving forward. The lightning crawls across the metal and dissipates into the air at his sides, crackling apart into nothing the way it should have 23 years ago, and one different life ago, in a room that looked almost exactly like this one, on a night when everything went wrong in every direction at once, and kept going wrong for 2 decades. The air around him smells of ozone and burned cloth. He does not notice. He is counting steps the way he has counted steps before. In training salas, and in battle, and in the worst moments of the worst nights, one foot in front of the other, each one a decision, each one a refusal, each one the physical act of choosing not to stop. 1 step, 2, 3, Palpatine's expression completes a journey Anakin has watched it take exactly once before, from a different vantage point, wearing a different face, calculation collapsing into fury, fury collapsing into something colder, and that cold thing arriving finally at recognition. He is looking at the chosen one, not the one he engineered, not the weapon he spent 13 years shaping out of grief and need, and the carefully applied pressure of a man who understood loneliness like an instrument. The actual chosen one, the one the prophecy always meant, the one who was always supposed to do exactly this, in exactly this room, and never got the chance the first time. The chosen one is walking through his fire. 4 steps. 5. The blade absorbs and redirects and absorbs again, and Anakin is still walking, still closing the distance, one deliberate bootfall at a time, his face utterly terribly calm. The calm is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of something larger than feeling, something that has moved through grief and fury in the full dark spectrum of what a life lived badly can produce, and has arrived on the other side of all of it at this. A man walking toward the end of something that should have ended a long time ago, lit from within by 2 names and the futures attached to them, carrying the full weight of every wrong choice he ever made, and not running from a single ounce of it. 6 steps. The lightning does not stop him. Nothing in this room was ever going to stop him. At arm's reach, he executes a Xian deflect, a Form V technique so fundamental to him, worn so smooth by years of practice beginning in a training cell, he can still smell if he lets himself remember it, that it requires no more conscious thought than breathing. Palpatine's lightsaber is swept from his grip in one clean arc. The crimson blade spins away and clatters against the far wall, extinguishes on impact, lies still, dead metal on durasteel. The silence that follows the clatter is enormous. No flourish, no drama in the motion itself, just the exact economical execution of a man who has spent 2 lifetimes learning how to do this one specific thing, and has finally been given the chance to do it correctly. What fuels this is not what anyone in the room believes it to be. Not rage, it was never rage. Not really, not even in the life where rage eventually swallowed him whole. Not the seductive pull of a darkness that used to live coiled just beneath his anger, waiting for any opening. What moves through him right now, walking him through fire without flinching, is the weight of 2 small faces he has never seen, and will. He doesn't know their precise features yet. Padme hasn't told him, they haven't chosen names, the future hasn't happened. But he can feel them the way he felt the Force before he understood what the Force was, as warmth, as direction, as 2 small, steady lights burning somewhere ahead in the dark. He walked through Palpatine's lightning for them. He would walk through it 100 times. He would walk through it 1,000. He thinks of Ahsoka, 12,000 light years away, in a medical bay full of sleeping brothers, chip after chip after chip, her hands steady because she has decided they don't get to shake. He thinks of Padme asleep in an apartment across this city that will not, tonight, become the place where the galaxy's longest grief begins. He thinks of a boy on a black volcanic shore who deserved so much better than what he was given, who needed one adult to see what was happening to him and step between him and it, and was failed, every time, including by himself. He is saving that boy too. He has been, this whole time. Palpatine stands in the center of his ruined office, weaponless, the 4 masters tightening the geometry around him in a slow, closing circle. His face is doing something complicated. It has worn this particular mask for 70 years, layer over layer, performance over performance. And now, with every piece of leverage stripped away, with his own weapon turned back against him by the one student he ever fully trusted, it simply falls. What is underneath is old. It is tired. It is the face of a man who bet everything he had, across 1,000 years of patient waiting and careful doctrine, on a single chosen one. And lost. But the Sith Lord has one card remaining. He does not reach for a weapon. He has no weapon left to reach for. He reaches instead for the thing that has always been his most reliable instrument. The tool that built an empire before a single shot was ever fired. Language. His voice shifts. Not to the warm political tenor that fooled a Senate for decades, and not to the screeching, ragged fury of Darth Sidious mid-battle. Something between the two. Something intimate. Almost gentle. The register of a man speaking to someone he has known since that person was a child. Because he has. He has known Anakin Skywalker since the Senate halls on Coruscant, when a small boy arrived from the Outer Rim and looked at everything around him with wide, careful eyes that were already learning which things to trust and which things to keep to himself. He spent 13 years studying those eyes. He knows every pressure point, every old wound, every love the boy carried like a second heartbeat. He does not threaten directly, he implies, he suggests. He speaks of resources, of contingencies, of loyal agents positioned throughout the city who know exactly where Senator Amidala's apartment sits, who carry standing orders that only his voice, his specific override code, can ever cancel. He tilts his head, and something almost fatherly settles across his ruined, exhausted face. You cannot kill me and keep her safe. A pause, gentle, precise, devastating. You know this. It was always my insurance, my boy. Anakin looks at him for a long moment. The masters are quiet. The room is quiet. Beyond the shattered wall panel and the sparking wreckage of the console, Coruscant keeps turning, indifferent, enormous. 12 kilometers of stacked civilization with no idea how close it came tonight. She is safe. Anakin's voice is calm, precise, absolute. Your contingencies have contingencies, and I know every one of them. I have spent 23 years inside your machine, Sidious. I know every agent, every safe house, every leverage point and hidden hand you ever built into this city. A beat, and the room leans into the silence that follows it. We have been dismantling them since before you realized we were here. Another beat, smaller, the kind that carries more weight for being brief. And you are nothing. 3 words, no anger behind them, no triumph. No theater of any kind, the exact absence of everything Palpatine has spent 70 years relying on, delivered the way you close a book you have already read all the way through. Mace Windu's voice, when it comes, is very quiet. He is not looking at Palpatine. He is looking at Anakin. Skywalker, you said execute. It is not a question, it is a confirmation request. The kind one soldier gives another in the breath before a line is crossed that cannot be uncrossed. One soldier asking another, "Are you certain? Are you still certain? Is this still what you mean?" Yes. Anakin does not hesitate. A beat, he has no trial he cannot corrupt, no prison he cannot eventually escape from, no ally we can fully neutralize, not even with everything we know now. Another beat, heavier. He is the last Sith Lord, Master Windu. And the Sith do not surrender. One more pause, and something in his voice drops lower, older, arriving from somewhere far below the register of the 22-year-old standing in this room. Neither do I. The narration does not linger on what happens next. This is a conscious choice, earned by everything that came before it. The weight of this moment lives entirely in what preceded it, not in the act itself. In the long arc of a plan built across 2 lifetimes, in the 5 Jedi standing where they stand, in the console that no longer exists, in 62 clones aboard a ship 12,000 light-years away, whose hands will stay clean. Mace Windu raises his blade. The 4 masters close the last of the geometry around a man who has finally, completely run out of doors. What the narration renders is not violence. It is completion. The closing of a circle that opened decades ago in a swamp on Naboo, when a young queen's crippled ship made an emergency landing on a desert world, and a small, frightened, brilliant boy turned and met a Jedi's eyes for the first time and understood, without knowing how he understood it, that something was about to change. The Sith grand plan, 1,000 years in careful patient construction, ends not with thunder, with a controlled exhalation. 12,000 light-years away, aboard the tribunal in the exact instant the relay would have transmitted, every conscious clone still moving through recovery feels it. A ghost sensation rippling through their brain stems, not a command, not an order, but the trace memory of a channel that opened somewhere at the far end of the galaxy and found no signal waiting to fill it. A held breath that will never be exhaled. A door that swung open and found nothing on the other side, and swung closed again. Ahsoka feels it too. She is sitting on an overturned supply crate in the medical bay, with 53 men sleeping across every available surface the room and corridor can offer. And she closes her eyes and breathes through the sensation the way you breathe through the last aftershock of something that already happened and already ended. Carefully, deliberately, giving it the respect it deserves, without letting it have more than that. Rex looks over at her from across the room. He has been watching her face for the last 30 seconds with the careful attention of a man who has learned to read her silences the way other people read words. "It's over," she says. "The broadcast failed." "How do you know?" She opens her eyes. Somewhere across an impossible distance, through a bond that has never once in either of their lives felt this steady, she can feel exactly what happened in a wrecked office on the other side of the galaxy. Can feel the shape of it, the way you feel a familiar hand close around your own in the dark. Because Anakin crushed it. The hours grind forward. The chapter of the ship's night compresses into sensation, the sting of antiseptic thick enough to taste at the back of the throat, the twin droid's low unbroken hum threading beneath everything else, like a second heartbeat, Rex's voice going rough and hoarse from repeating the same handful of reassurances to brother after brother, as each one surfaces into a version of the truth none of them signed up to carry. "You're safe. It's out. You didn't do anything. You're safe." Some of them wake crying openly, in the particular way that men who have been trained never to cry in front of each other sometimes do, when they have been through something that exceeds the capacity of training to address. And none of them will ever admit it happened, and every single one of them does it anyway, and the room holds it without comment, which is the only correct response and the only one available. Some wake angry instead, a complicated fury with nowhere honest to land, at themselves for a crime they were built to commit and never got the chance to refuse, at the Republic for the program, at a galaxy that could engineer something this methodically cruel into the bodies of men who never asked to be made and never asked for any of the things they were made to do. Ahsoka takes every version of it without flinching. Her hands stay steady through incision after incision because she has decided, somewhere in the first hour, quietly, without announcing it to anyone, the way real decisions are made, that they don't get to shake. Not tonight. Later, she has promised herself, later. Clone after clone cycles through the tables. The recovery mat fills and empties and fills again. Somewhere past the 4th hour, she stops counting faces and starts simply trusting the numbers Rex calls out to her. 40 through, 60 through. Almost there, Commander. Almost. Because counting each one individually would mean feeling each one individually, and she does not have that kind of time to spend on herself. She files each face instead, the way she filed faces before battles, stores them, marks them present, notes which ones she will think about later when there is room for thinking. Biv, Ketch, Wooly, Boyle. Names that should have been in an Order 66 casualty report and aren't, because she was here, because she was fast enough, because the bond held and the plan held, and both of them were, against every reasonable calculation, enough. Jesse works the cue beside Rex through the whole of it. He should not be on his feet. The anesthetic has not fully cleared his system for the first 2 hours, and the shaking in his hands is visible if you know where to look, which Ahsoka does but says nothing about, because Jesse's particular form of dealing with the impossible is to make himself immediately useful, and she is not going to take that away from him. By the 3rd hour, the shaking has stopped. By the 4th, he has developed a system for transferring unconscious brothers from the corridor mats to the operating table that is approximately 15% faster than Rex's original method. And he explains the improvement to Rex in the same calm, precise tone he uses for every operational improvement, as if efficiency in the middle of the most shattering night of his life is simply what you do. Which, for Jesse, is true. When the last clone, Private Ketch, the same soldier she passed saluting in a corridor, an entire lifetime ago, back when this night was still only minutes old, and the worst of it hadn't started, opens his eyes and looks up at her with nothing behind them but exhaustion and relief, and the particular gratitude of a man who has just been handed his own future back. Ahsoka finally lets herself lean against the cool durasteel wall of the medical bay and close her eyes. 62 clones lie in recovery across every available surface the room and corridor can offer. The air smells of antiseptic and something else underneath it. Something that has no official name, but that anyone who has ever spent time in the aftermath of something that almost ended catastrophically and didn't would recognize immediately. Rex appears beside her without a word, wiping his hands on a cloth that gave up being clean hours ago. He stands next to her in the silence the way he has always stood next to her in silences, not filling it, not performing anything, simply being present in the way that Rex has always been present, steadily, without asking for acknowledgement, because presence has never required it. Neither of them speaks. The ship's hyperdrive keeps its low, patient thrum beneath them, carrying them all forward one uncounted second at a time. "Is it done out there?" Rex asks finally. "Coruscant?" Ahsoka reaches for the bond instead of answering right away. Across the distance, on the other side of a war that is ending tonight instead of beginning, Anakin answers her, not in words, in warmth, in something steady and whole and entirely his own, arriving the way a hand settles on a shoulder that has been carrying too much for too long, not asking the shoulder to stop carrying it, just making the weight known and shared. "It's done," she says, and lets her eyes stay closed for one more moment. We made it. The office after. The four masters stand in the wreckage of a torn wall panel and a floor scattered with the evidence of a man who was, in the end, emperor of absolutely nothing. Agent Kolar sits down on the floor near the door, not wounded, simply in need, suddenly and completely, of something solid beneath him, some surface that will hold still while the rest of things settle. Kit Fisto stands at the window, looking out at a city that has no idea it isn't waking up inside an empire this morning, his expression carrying the specific, composed weight of someone who has processed something enormous and is not yet ready to speak about it. Sacy Tin has already clipped his blade back to his belt, hands folded behind his back, eyes closed, breathing through something that belongs to no category in the Jedi Code's existing vocabulary. Mace Windu stands at the window for a long moment, beside Kit. Then he turns. "You promised me an explanation." "I did." Anakin doesn't look away from him. A pause, long enough to mean something. it won't make sense. Nothing tonight has made sense. Something moves behind Mace Windu's exhausted eyes. Not humor exactly, but the ghost of a capacity for it, which is perhaps the closest either of them is going to get tonight to something light. Begin. So he does. Anakin lowers himself to the floor of the ruined office, back against the one wall still standing whole, and tells Mace Windu the truth. Not a curated version of it. Not the version that softens the worst pieces, or frames his own failures in the most forgiving available light. All of it. Vader, the suit, the respirator, Mustafar. 23 years distilled into an account delivered in the same clean, sequenced way he delivered the tactical briefing in the hallway, because this is simply another briefing, and the subject is simply him, which turns out to be easier to accept as a premise than he expected. He speaks for a long time. The four masters listen without interrupting, and what sits in the room while he speaks is not judgment. It is something closer to the quality of attention a person gives to something they understand they will only hear once, and which they need to hear completely, so they go very still and let it come. When he finishes, Mace Windu is quiet for a long moment. "I believe you," he says finally. "The Force confirms it." Another pause, longer than the sentence needed it to be, a man measuring the distance between what he can accept intellectually and what he can hold emotionally. "I wish I could say I was at peace with what that means." "You don't have to be at peace with it tonight," Anakin says. He reaches out through the bond, not for words, just for the warmth of it, just to feel the wire still humming between him and his Padawan across the dark. None of us do. Republic security is alerted to the isolated incident in the Senate district through official channels before the hour is out. A handful of clones stationed there, the ones who received the ghost fragment of a signal that escaped the relay in the half-second before Anakin's hand closed around it, the ones whose hands moved before their minds could catch up, are taken into custody, and at Anakin's direct insistence, issued immediately and with enough force that it is not treated as a suggestion, they are treated rather than punished. Sent quietly towards surgical teams, toward the same kind of table Ahsoka has spent the night bent over on a ship still hours from home. The Jedi Temple goes to secure lockdown. Its ancient defenses activated for the first time in living memory, its halls lit at an intensity they were never designed to hold at this time of night, waiting out a night the galaxy will spend years trying to fully understand. Anakin sits through a debrief that runs 6 hours long. He tells a story that should be structurally impossible to tell, and he tells it anyway, delivered into the silence of a council chamber while dawn light gathers at the windows and the long night begins, slowly, to give way. The tribunal sets down on a military landing pad in the Senate district at dawn. Coruscant's manufactured dawn, the artificial light that rolls slow and deliberate across the sky as the planet completes its rotation against the orbital lamp grid, indifferent to whether anyone below has slept. The cruiser's landing struts deploy with a long hydraulic sigh, settling the ship's full weight onto the pad with the careful permanence of something that has traveled a very long way and is relieved to stop. Anakin is already there. He has been standing on that pad for 20 minutes, which is not something he would admit to anyone who happened to ask him, and which he does not attempt to disguise or explain away to himself. He is waiting. He is allowed to wait. After everything, he is allowed this. The landing ramp lowers with a mechanical groan and a gust of recycled shipboard air that carries, faintly, the smell of antiseptic, and something underneath it that he identifies without needing to think about it. The particular smell of a space where something difficult was done, and held, and finished. Rex appears first. He looks like a man who has aged 5 years, and then 10, and then somehow come back from both in the same night. The specific, weathered look of someone who has spent 10 straight hours carrying unconscious brothers from a corridor to a table and back again, watching each one wake up to discover what he was almost used to become. His armor is marked with the evidence of those hours in a dozen small ways that anyone who knows how to read armor could read. He finds Anakin's eyes across the distance of the landing pad and gives him a single nod. Slow, weighted, the kind of nod that carries far more than the gesture was built to hold. Anakin nods back, the same weight, returned in full. Then Ahsoka. She comes down the ramp in her whites and grays without ceremony. 17 years old, and carrying eyes that have seen the far side of 38 years of grief. Tired in a way that runs below bone. Tired in the way that only people who have stayed awake for something necessary are tired. Comprehensively, and without regret. Anakin does not move toward her. He waits, deliberately, letting her choose the distance the way she has always had to choose everything for herself, on her own terms, in her own time. Because that is what respecting her has always meant, and he intends to get it right this time from the very beginning. She closes the distance. When she stops in front of him, she is close enough that he can see the dried tracks of old tears on her face, the dust of the ship's air caught in the creases they left, and he has not seen this face, not this exact face, this expression, young and ancient simultaneously, in 23 years, and he finds that he cannot hold the sight of it without his chest doing something complicated and involuntary. He says her name, just her name, not Snips, not Commander. Her name the way you say the name of something you almost lost and didn't. Ahsoka. She looks at him. Then she steps forward and they are holding each other with the specific ferocity of two people who know exactly what they almost lost tonight. Exactly what they almost became to each other, across a different version of this exact hour. A version with fire in it, and betrayal, and 20 years of a silence neither of them ever chose. The hug breaks eventually, the way necessary things eventually break. Neither of them steps back. They stand at arm's length, reading each other's face the way you read something you have been waiting years to receive. "You did it," Ahsoka says. "He's gone. We did it." His voice catches somewhere in the middle and steadies again. "You did it too, Snips." She shakes her head. "I was on a ship in hyperspace. You kept 62 of my men alive." His jaw works once. "You kept Rex alive." If Rex had come through that door tonight with a murder order sitting in his head, instead of standing next to me in that office, he stops. Does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. There are at least 5 versions of this night, where one of them was too slow, or too far, or just barely not enough, and they have both, in one life or another, lived through versions of that kind of failure, and they are not living through any of them now. Rex approaches while they are still standing close, still recalibrating the distance between them. He stops in front of Anakin for the first time since the world changed shape overnight. And there is a moment, the particular, unnavigated moment between a soldier who has just learned what was sitting inside his own skull and the man who fought to end it before it could be used, that neither of them quite knows how to cross. Rex crosses it the way Rex crosses everything, directly. General. His voice is steady and it costs him something to keep it that way, and he keeps it anyway. Captain. A pause. Long enough to mean it. Thank you. Rex's jaw tightens once. I know it wasn't only you, but you're the one I can say it to in person right now. So, thank you. Anakin's hand finds his shoulder and stays there. It almost wasn't enough, he says quietly. But it was. Rex holds his eyes. Tonight it was. The sunrise rolls across the Coruscant skyline. Artificial, precise, indifferent to everything that happened in the 12 hours before it. 2 veterans stand on a military landing pad with the wreckage of the galaxy's worst possible night behind them, and the rest of a long, uncertain history still stretched ahead. The bond between Anakin and Ahsoka has gone quiet now, not because it is closed, but because for the first time in this entire story, neither of them needs it to carry anything across a distance. They are standing in the same place. That turns out to be enough. That turns out, Ahsoka thinks, watching the light change over a city that will never know how close it came, to be everything. Weeks after the night of Order 66 that never quite finished becoming Order 66, the Galactic Senate chamber fills to a capacity it has not seen since the declaration of war. Mace Windu stands at the central podium in traditional Jedi brown, a color he almost never wears in public, and looks visibly deeply uncomfortable at a podium of any kind. He delivers his testimony with the blunt economy of a general filing a battle report rather than a statesman crafting a legacy. The truth about Chancellor Palpatine. The truth about the inhibitor chips, buried in the skulls of every clone soldier who has fought under the Republic's flag. The truth about a Sith infiltration that ran unbroken through the heart of the Republic's institutions, for longer than most of the senators in that chamber have been alive. He does not editorialize. He does not apologize on behalf of an order that spent a war failing to see what was standing in plain sight. He simply tells the truth, which turns out, in the end, to be more than enough. The Senate's reaction is not one thing. It is 500 things at once, and none of them are small. There are senators who weep, and senators who shout, and senators who sit in a silence so complete it occupies more space in the chamber than the noise does. There are senators who have spent years benefiting from Palpatine's arrangements, and who are now performing outrage with the practiced facility of people who have spent years performing whatever the room required. There are senators who are simply profoundly relieved, who have felt, without knowing precisely what they were feeling, the pressure of something enormous and wrong pressing against the structure of the Republic for years, and who experience Mace Windu's testimony less as revelation and more as confirmation of a thing their bodies already knew. The work of what comes after begins that afternoon, and will not end for years. No one in the chamber is under any illusion that testimony closes a chapter. It opens one. The Jedi Order's internal reckoning proves harder than the Senate's, because the Jedi have always been harder on themselves than anyone outside their walls could manage to be. The Council convenes sessions that stretch across days, then weeks, the same impossible questions returning in every configuration the assembled masters can find for them. The dogma, the distance. The attachment they forbade, and the fear that forbidding it quietly bred in its place. The specific, generational damage of telling people they were not allowed to grieve, and then wondering why their students arrived at crisis points they had never been taught to navigate. Yoda, whose long Dagobah exile becomes, in this version of the galaxy, entirely unnecessary, who sits instead in the council chamber to be present for the full accounting, speaks in his capacity as the oldest living Jedi in the room. His ears settle low, his voice is careful and tired, and honest in the way that only very long lives can afford to be honest about failure, without the luxury of pretending it was someone else's. Failed, we did, he says. The dogma, the distance, the attachment we forbade, and the fear that forbidding it quietly bred in its place. A long pause. Different we must be, not in the Force, in ourselves. The changes that follow are not immediate. They never are. But they begin. Real ones. Structural ones. The kind that alter the thing rather than the presentation of the thing. And this time the Order is alive to see them begin, which is the prerequisite for everything else. Anakin sits in those sessions. He does not speak often. When he does, he speaks from a vantage point no living Jedi has. And the Council has learned by now that this particular vantage point, however impossible its origin, is worth listening to. He does not say, "I told you so." He has already told them so, in a 6-hour debrief that cost him considerably more than it looked like from the outside. That is sufficient. There is a scene the story has been building toward since its first breath, and it arrives on a quiet evening in a Coruscant apartment, before a much longer journey to Naboo that neither of them knows yet will become the shape of their lives. Anakin sits with Padmé and tells her everything, not in summary, not in carefully edited pieces calibrated to spare her the worst of it, all of it in full, the way he told Mace Windu, Vader, the suit, the respirator, the burning. 23 years distilled into an account that takes the better part of 3 hours and costs him something visible in every sentence of the telling. She listens without speaking for the entire length of it, her hands wrapped around his the whole way through, not gripping, not holding on out of fear, just present, a contact that says, "I am here for this. I am not going anywhere. You can keep going." When he finally stops, the apartment is quiet, and outside the window, Coruscant is doing what Coruscant always does. 12 kilometers of uncountable lives stacked on top of each other, and indifferent to the specific enormity of what just happened in this room. She says only, "You came back. I always came back." His voice catches once in the middle, finds itself again. Just, not in time, not the first time. She takes his hand and holds it flat against her chest, where he can feel her heart keeping its own steady rhythm underneath her palm. The steadiness of it, the simple physical fact of her heart still beating, still here, still hers, undoes him more completely than anything else tonight has managed to. This is the first time, she says. They leave for Naboo not long after. The lake house that was supposed to be the quiet, tragic end of an old story becomes, instead, the beginning of an entirely new one, which is the only kind of story worth telling. Ahsoka does not rejoin the Order. She brings this to the Council directly, plainly, on a morning several weeks after the night that almost was Order 66, with no resentment in it and no apology for the absence of resentment. "I serve the Force," she tells them. "I always have. I just don't serve the Order the same way you do, and you don't need me to." She meets Yoda's eyes when she says it. He holds her gaze for a long moment, and what passes between them is not agreement exactly. It is recognition, which is older than agreement and costs more. He nods once and does not ask her to reconsider. She spends the months that follow as an independent agent, finding survivors scattered by a war that almost ended differently, filling the gaps a formal Jedi structure was never built to reach, doing the quiet and unglamorous work that has always suited her best. She is good at it. She has always been good at it. The loneliness she once wore like a mantle, heavy and unchosen, she has learned by now to wear like a cloak instead, something that keeps the cold out rather than letting it in. It is not the same as company. It is not the same as belonging, but it is hers, which turns out to matter more than she expected. She visits Naboo when the lake house is ready. She visits again when it stops being necessary to call it a visit. Naboo, the lake house, a summer afternoon years later, gold light lying flat across still water that holds the reflection of a sky so consistently blue, it seems like something someone chose, rather than something that happened. The twins, Luke and Leia, 2 years old, mobile and furious, and unmistakably, exhaustingly force-sensitive, are running the length of the dock with the total commitment of small people who have not yet learned to moderate the intensity of their own enthusiasms. They are attempting, and failing, to push each other into the lake, which is a project neither of them will abandon simply because it keeps not working. Anakin sits at the end of the dock with his bare feet in the water and watches them orbit him like small, determined moons, and his face does the thing it has been doing with increasing frequency since they were born. Opens, the way a room opens, when it is finally being used for what it was built for. The shuttle sets down beyond the tree line. The sound of it reaches him through the warm afternoon air before anything else does, and he is already half-turned when the footsteps reach the dock. Ahsoka comes down the ramp with the easy, unhurried stride of someone arriving somewhere she has been many times before, not a guest anymore, or a visitor, or someone navigating the question of how much space she is entitled to take up. She carries something in one hand wrapped in cloth and does not explain what it is until later, which is a habit she has not grown out of, and Anakin has long since stopped expecting her to. She sits beside him on the end of the dock. The children investigate immediately, with the complete and total unself-consciousness of the very young, for whom strangers are simply an opportunity that has not yet been fully assessed. Luke tugs at her leku with both fists, applying considerably more force than the task requires. Leia stands slightly back from the whole proceeding, watching Ahsoka with wide, evaluating eyes that already, somehow, look like they are drafting a position paper. "They're exactly like you," Ahsoka says. Terrifying. Both of them. A pause. Comfortable, warm, holding its own weight easily. Force-sensitive. Deeply, obviously going to be a problem force-sensitive. "I know." He looks down at Luke, who has abandoned the leku, and is now sitting on Anakin's boot with the focused satisfaction of someone who has successfully claimed territory. A beat. What do I do with that? She looks at him for a long moment, at this young man who is also somehow ancient, at her master who has become her equal, at the person who once contained the capacity to end everything, and chose, on one impossible night, to save it instead. Who has been making that choice every day since, in smaller ways, in the ways that don't get commemorated or testified about before a Senate, in the ways that are just a life being lived correctly. "You let me help," she says. He does not answer. He does not need to. The answer is already given in the fact that she is here, and he is here, and the water is doing what water does in the afternoon light on Naboo, turning gold and then amber, and then, at the far edge of the tree line, the deep violet of a sky that has been doing exactly this for 1,000 years, and will do it for 1,000 more, regardless of what any of the people standing beneath it do or fail to do. It doesn't need them to witness it. It does this whether anyone watches or not. But they watch anyway. 2 children fall asleep on the dock in the final warmth of the afternoon, one leaning against the other with the unself-conscious ease of people who have never been strangers to each other, and never expect to be. A man who was once a ghost of darkness sits with his feet in the water, watching the light change without needing it to change any faster. A woman who was once a ghost of exile sits beside him, with her knees pulled up and her eyes on the far bank, and is not going anywhere. The Force, which has held its breath for 1,000 years, quietly exhales. The water holds the light a little longer than the sky does. Then the sky catches up. Then both of them together go dark. The slow, certain dark of a night that knows it will be followed by a morning, that has always been followed by a morning, that will be followed by this specific morning tomorrow, and then another one after that, For as long as there are people awake early enough to watch the light come back, there always are. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.